So what I wanted to do this morning is I wanted to take a few minutes, right, to address something of a serious nature, and I think obviously by definition a timely nature, right? And that is the question of, is war kosher? Is war kosher, right? So to put that into context, we have to, as Jewish people, to answer that question, we can always look at texts, right? We would have to have a textual basis for making war kosher. Now, if we think about it, the place that we find this discussed, which makes sense, is the last book of the Torah. And in the last book of the Torah, there are a couple of provisions given for going to war. Okay? Then what happens is there are a few comments scattered throughout the Talmud, but it's not until the 12th century that, ironically, Maimonides, Rambam from Spain, puts together comprehensive, a comprehensive compendium of the laws of war. It's actually in a grouping of laws which are for the Melachim, for the kings. So here we have a chapter, 12th century Spain, where the Jewish people are surrounded by Christians and Muslims, called the Laws of the Kings and the Laws of War. So first and foremost, the question becomes that we have to think about is why on earth would the Rambam, with his very nice and gentle and intellectual and philosophical minority population, be concerned about the laws of the Jewish people going to war? After all, they were in Europe. They did not have a standing army. There was no idea that there would ever become a standing army. So why did the Rambam, in fact, take time to put together a compendium of Jewish law regarding war? And I think it's a fair question. And I think the best answer that we can come up with is that it represents both the past and the future. How so? So Rambam, as you recall, was a philosopher as well as a legalist. So when he is writing, he is not writing only based on his present day experience, but he's also writing thinking messianically, if you will. That's not to say that he was himself somebody who was messianic in total outlook, but certainly he was thinking about a future redemption of the Jewish people. So in that sense, it's certainly fair to say that if Rambam envisioned sometime in the distant future that the Jewish people will have an army, that he would make laws pertaining to war, or he at least compile them in a way that was easy to follow. So that was sort of his future perspective. And he grounds it, as does Jewish thought always, in a past text, right? Very important. And it has to do with this, with Sefer Devarim, the book of Devarim. So I want to share with you, I just want to accomplish a couple of things today, if I may. So I want to give you the historical background. I'll give you one thought about how we should approach war today, and something for us to think about. Clearly, again, it's on our minds. So the Rambam begins his Hilchot Milchama by saying the following. He says, Shalosh mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael b'sha'at knisatan la'aretz, that the people of Israel were given 3 commandments when they went into the land in the book of Devarim, right? And this is what they were. He says, Lamanot lachem melech shene'amar som tasim alechem melech. Number one, you have to appoint for yourself a king. Right? Now, by the way, remember, God wasn't really in favor of a king, but all the other nations were doing it. The Jews said, us too, etc. But the idea is that one of the commandments, when you enter into the land and have sovereignty, is that you should have a melech. Right? So one could make the argument that's because we don't want anarchy, and there has to be some type of a system of authority. Second mitzvah, Ulahachritzar Oshel Amalek. The second commandment is that once you go into Canaan, you have to wipe out any of the offspring of Amalek. You'll recall from Exodus 16 that Amalek were the people who attacked the Jewish people as they were fleeing Egypt from the back, specifically attacking the elderly and the children. So that was the second commandment. And he says, V'livnot beit habechira. The third commandment is to build, if you will, a temple, a third structure, right? Okay, fine, or at least a mishkan, a dwelling place for God's presence, fine. So he says that we have these mitzvot, right? And if you have a mitzvah that says that when you go into the land that you have to wipe out Amalek and the descendants of Amalek, clearly that's saying you should go to war against a specific type of people. The Seder? So that's where he starts, okay? So if we think about the fact that we have a Torah-itic commandment to go to war, where does that take place? It's against the 7 nations that were inhabiting Canaan at the time, right? We couldn't go into the promised land unless we got rid of these 7 tribes, right? The other one was to fight against Amalek. Now, in our day and age, we have to ask ourselves the question: does that apply? Well, we know that the 7 nations of Canaan, the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites, I haven't met a lot recently. Yeah. So they don't exist. Historically, they don't exist anymore. Similarly, the argument is made as far back as the 5th century that there were no more descendants of Amalek. Okay? There were no more descendants of Amalek. Amalek had sort of died out. You couldn't identify who the descendants of Amalek were. We have a metaphor that we use, and we'll use it on Purim, where we're going to say that Haman was a descendant of Amalek. Okay? And in fact, they offer you a lineage, but most people will argue that's somewhat fictitious. Okay, fine. So these 2 wars, plus a third type, which I'm going to explain to in a moment, are what are called milchemet mitzvah. In other words, they are a commanded war. It is a precept to take over the 7 nations of Canaan when you go into the land, thousands of years ago. It is a precept to wage war against Amalek, parentheses, they don't exist anymore. But the third type of milchemet mitzvah is the following, is a defensive war against a launched attack, right? So that's a milchemet mitzvah. In other words, according to the codes, there is a mitzvah that if you are attacked, you have to go to war. The other type of war that we have, so those are 3 types of war called milchemet mitzvah, and the next one is called the milchemet reshut, which we would refer to as a, what's a good English translation, David? Milchemet reshut. A permitted war, right? If I say it's a permitted war, what would your question be? Who permits it, right? Fair question, right? So in the time of Maimonides, right, there was a king and there was a Sanhedrin. It is just to let you understand the structure. The king was the one who was able to tell people to go out to the milchemet mitzvah, those 3 commanded wars. The king just says, unilaterally, I found descendants of the 7 nations, go kill them. I found descendants of Amalek, go to war with them. Or we've been attacked, we must go to war. That is in the purview of the Melech in the Bible. Today, that's in the purview, the allegory is that is in the purview of who? The leader who, and that is the prime minister of the country, right? So the Melech and the Nasi today, right? So in theory, according to Torah thought, Netanyahu, who serves as the prime minister, the Nasi, can tell the people to go to war. Let's go back to the milchemet reshut, the permitted war, or the war of reshut, and that is a war that is described by Maimonides as follows. It's a war that is done for the purposes of expansion when life is not at risk, and this must be vetted through what's called the Sanhedrin or the High Court, which today, the analogy today, is the Knesset, right? So, for example, if Israel decided they wanted to make a greater biblical Israel, that would have to go through the Sanhedrin, or today the Knesset, right? Because that's supposed to represent the populace, the popular vote. So now what we have is the following. We have the idea that the Melech of the Bible is compared to the Nasi, and that person, that singular individual, can command the people to go to three types of war, two of which historically don't apply anymore. The third definitely does apply. The second type of war, if you want to expand your borders, if it was for the purpose of commerce, etc., that Milchemet Reshut can only be commanded through the Knesset. Okay? So those are the types of war that we have. There are a lot of details about the war. There's a question of what constitutes an attack, right? So if you recall, right, 1967, there was a preemptive war. 1967 was a preemptive war, meaning that even though all these armies had lined up to go to war against Israel, excuse me, outside of closing some straits, right, of water, there wasn't yet an attack, but Israel was given permission halachically in 1967 to start a preemptive war. Clearly today, we are not in that situation, right? We have a situation today where Israel was attacked first. Clearly, within the eyes of Jewish law, there's nothing wrong with going to war now against your enemies. I want to share one more passage from the Torah. The Torah says in Devarim also that the following things you cannot do. You cannot cut down a fruit tree. Can't cut down a fruit tree. You're going to go to war, you're not allowed to cut. Okay. Why are you not cutting down the fruit tree? You're not cutting down the fruit tree, and this is where it becomes really, you have to apply some thinking to it. The idea is that yes, you have to go to war for a reason, but you are not allowed to be what's called a baltashi. You are not allowed to make wanton destruction just for the purposes of destroying. The fruit tree represents the future for that city and for the inhabitants who are there. So whereas you might need to do what you need to do today, you are not allowed, according to Jewish law, to impact what that community can do in the future, right? To if you will, set up shop there. And that includes that thinking is extended to include even fertile soil, that we're not allowed to destroy fertile soil because once we have peace, thereafter, the people will need the soil to be able to rebuild. I'm going to conclude with the following thought. So this is just telling us that the Jewish law thinks about these things, and it's actually very, very relevant at this time. So listen, the following is taken from Devarim also, and this is, again, resonates so strongly. Ki tikrav el ir lahilachem alecha. If you are going towards a city to make war with it, what are you supposed to do? And I think Israel does this very specific. This is from the Torah. It says, "V'karata elecha l'shalom." You are supposed to announce in advance. You're supposed to ask them, right, to how do you call it in English? To surrender. Yes, to make peace with them. You're supposed to ask them. Once you make that request, you have to wait 3 days before you can attack. Okay, you have to wait 3 days to attack, right? And it says the following: "V'haya im shalom ta'anecha." If they answer that they will make peace, and they're going to make a peace arrangement with you, that is all good. And the people who are remaining there, they would have to pay. They would have to pay some type of a tax, whatever you might call it, etc. But the idea is that the request for peace has to happen. The Jewish army is supposed to wait unless it is clear that they do not have peaceful intentions towards you. Final thought, that when you're ascertaining, from all of the codes of law, the question is the following, and this is the terrible position that Israel is in right now on purpose, right? Well planned, well strategized. I saw what's called, on the TikTok, they have people, they send out various memes, etc. And I saw, one of these watermelon flags with Palestinian symbol, the name Rafah, which is where the Palestinians are in the south right now, pro-Palestinian comment that said the following, posted, by the way, by a Jewish person, that said the following, where are they supposed to go? Now, first glance, I'm saying, okay, I get it, right? But by the way, why is it that that same question doesn't apply to us? Where am I supposed to go? Right? Where am I as a Jewish person supposed to go? River to the sea, it's nonsense, blah, blah, blah. The same question that social activists want to apply to the situation of non-Jews and this population never applied to Israel. That never applies to the Jewish people. Freedoms, sovereignty, self-determination, etc., is not a right that we are entitled to according to others. And that's the whole problem, is that when you think about this idea, where are they supposed to go? The whole idea that there is an Israel, because there was no other place for us to go because we got kicked out for various reasons. Why did the Jews get kicked out? Because they were rich, because they were poor. Because they were powerful, because they weren't powerful. Because they were bankers, because they were farmers, etc. So this idea of where they're supposed to go, last idea is that when we attack, and this is one halachic problem that the Jewish army has right now, you're supposed to leave, and again, it's very specific in the codes, you're allowed to attack the city, but you have to leave one side open for people to leave. Right? You're supposed to surround it 3 sides, and there's supposed to be a 4th side. What I'd like you to do is you're going to ask yourself the question, well, how is Israel supposed to do that if Egypt is on the 4th side, the Mediterranean is here, etc.? So what I want you to do is look at the 4th side. Go look it up when you get home, and look at the 4th side of the pictures of the fence between Egypt and Gaza. And then ask yourself, why is it that Egypt has a fence like this? You won't believe it when you see it, what it looks like. Okay? So Israel, in theory, and they've done that. They've behaved in accordance with Jewish law by making rites of passage, right? Making rites of passage. And by the way, in the codes, you're supposed to let women and children go because ostensibly they are not going to attack. That is not the case here, right? We know that women are terrorists, freedom fighters, etc., etc. They have intent to harm Jewish people. And unfortunately, the same thing is true of children, right, who are armed and wrapped up, etc., etc. It's a very, very difficult position that Israel is in. What I would say to you is that I happen to believe, based on my reading, that Israel is acting in accordance with Jewish law, which is that they are acting with compassion, but they are also acting as they should, with the right to ensure Jewish sovereignty, Jewish existence, Jewish freedoms that our people have fought for and hoped for thousands and thousands of years. We should not take for 1 minute, 1 day, the miracle of the state of Israel for granted. We bless the IDF for their efforts, and we pray and we know, Israel, Amen.